Hello my friends and welcome back. It's Wednesday. It's hump day. So happy Wednesday to you, my friends. I'll begin this video with a human story, with a humanized aspect of this war, and I'll introduce you to this 70-year-old man who walked from Donetsk, Donetsk Oblast, to Kharkiv, because he did not want to live under the Russian occupation. He also had 3 cows and a dog, and he took them with him. Let's watch the whole video. It's 1 minute long. That's the guy. When people ask me, where are you coming from? I say, from the afterlife. There's not much left of our village. Torsk is a frontline village near in the Donetsk Oblast, and Russians are trying to take it. And this old man had enough. He did not want to live under the Russians. He started walking to Kharkiv, and he did walk a long time until the Ukrainian army volunteers found him and helped him. When I started to leave, there were very powerful hits from 10 in the evening until 1 in the morning without stopping. Now we are driving past Kharkiv. I can't believe it. Grandpa walked from Dorska with 3 cows and a dog. This is the resilience of the Ukrainian people. This is how much they do not want the Russian occupation. They are ready to do whatever is necessary, even walking your 3 cows for over 100 kilometers. Because unfortunately the volunteers did not take him from there. He did not want to accept help. He said he could manage on his own because he was strong. Oh, I already know the stubbornness of the Ukrainian grandfathers, grandmothers. Like, I can do it on my own. I have to. I survived the Second World War. I survived. You know, if they're older, if they're like 90, then I survived the whole of the war. I will survive this. Sometimes volunteers. For example, I'm talking to Brandon Mitchell. He's coming to Estonia tomorrow. We're going to shoot a podcast in my studio right here. He's a volunteer. He tells me they are having issues sometimes with these elderly, stubborn Ukrainian babushkas and grandfathers because they don't want to leave, or they don't want any help, or they have a very strong attitude, although their homes are being bombed. So these guys, they have personality. He wasn't as worried about himself as he was about the animals. There was a hit on the neighbor's house. We grabbed what we could and went at 2 in the morning. It's a house for cows, but it's already dark. Whose is this? It's my mom's house, and she's at my place. There's a boiler. It's quiet and peaceful. Grandpa's here, the cows are here, doggy as well. Little doggy. When we came to the neighboring village, walked 6 to 8 kilometers, we saw the glow on the place where my hut was. A new home was found for Vladimir, his cows and his dog in the Poltava region. Thank you to every person who does not abandon animals during the war. And this is where one of the biggest differences with Ukrainian and Russian army comes into play. The animals, the treatment of the animals. We have countless videos of Ukrainian soldiers rescuing kittens, dogs. Even with the Novakhovka Dam was broken by the Russians, it was blown up, then Ukrainians devoted a lot of effort and energy to saving the animals who had to swim or cling to something to survive. In the Russian trenches, we get videos of them torturing animals and making fun about it. So there's a huge difference in my eyes, and I know there's no question for me who is the right side of history, in my eyes. I don't have a sponsor today, my friends. I don't have most videos, actually. So I'll just take this moment to let you know that I am doing a podcast every Monday, Rehi podcast. The link is in the description below, and you can see it on the screen also. Every Monday, I've done like 7 or 8 episodes now, and I feel confident enough to advertise it to you because it has been going on for 2 months already. Every Monday come hell or high water. For example, we had Estonian Foreign Minister Margus Tsahkna 2 weeks ago. We had the Chief of Staff of the Estonian Defense League last week. Go and check it out. Rehi podcast on YouTube. My friends, I'll look into a short thread for you how the Russian opening of the new Kharkiv offensive or Kharkiv front actually, it was shooting themselves into the foot. It was really bad. At the beginning, they completely surprised the Ukrainians. Although, yes, Ukrainians knew Russians were gathering forces, the attack was still a surprise since it captured also about 5 kilometers into the depth of the northern Kharkiv Oblast. Then the Ukrainians managed to stabilize the situation, and now counteroffensives, localized, calm down, it's not the major counteroffensive. Localized counteroffensives by the Ukrainians have begun, and Liptsi, for example, main settlement on the left part of the offensive to Kharkiv, Liptsi was liberated already. Ukrainians are slowly pushing the Russians out. What was the outcome in the end of this offensive? It was big, because now, after this offensive, most Western countries have allowed their weapons to be used, not all across the Russian soil, but on Belgorod Oblast soil. There are limitations, and that is just north from Kharkiv, meaning Belgorod Oblast. HIMARS can shoot into Belgorod. A lot of F-16 donating countries stated that their planes can shoot into Russian soil, and this has been in the main communication for the past month, that Western weapons should be used, especially in the north of Kharkiv. That was all a reaction to the Russians opening the new front. So them doing this guided the Western powers through public pressure to allow their weapons to be used on Russian soil, which is really, really bad for their logistics and their efforts on training their men close to the front. Because HIMARS has a lot of food now, so much, so many targets, and they're firing daily. Also, we already see the effects of this allowance, because May was the heaviest month for the Russians in this entire full-scale invasion. 39,000 men knocked out cold, 1,100 artillery systems knocked out cold. Secondly, the attack on Kharkiv united the West in its support for Ukraine. The support has significantly accelerated in the recent months. Third, Ukraine now has permission to strike Russian territory with Western weapons, and this will have lasting consequences on the entire war. Putin remains the greatest strategist of our time. It's, one after one, Putin takes these decisions, or the Russian military leadership, that actually in the end consolidates West behind Ukraine and is worse for them. Opening a new front or attacking Ukrainian energy infrastructure forces West to give Ukraine more air defense. Opening a new front forces West to allow their weapons to be used on Russian soil. So they are just shooting themselves in the foot one time after another, and it's fun to watch. Now, my friends, I'll read you a long thread. I think it's worth it. It really shows the situation of the Russian armed forces and their economy also, because everything that comes out of their economy is the expression of that economy and how powerful or how broken it is. And in this case, we have seen videos of this machine. You can see in the photo, Bukhanka, or the loaf in English. This machine is from 1965. Now, it is so damn cheap to produce. New of this machine costs $15,000. It's easy to produce since you don't need almost any electronics. It's all mechanical. It doesn't even have an air conditioning, a radio, or electric windows. It's just all mechanical. Of course, you might not need these things on the front anyway. But Russians are using these big time, by the thousands. They have restarted the production of this vehicle since it's so cheap, and they have issues with armored personnel carriers. I'll read you the thread. It's quite interesting and quite spicy for me. The loaf, or Bukhanka, a van designed in 1965, has become Russia's main battlefield transport vehicle. The loaf reveals a lot about how well Russia is doing in Ukraine. The loaf has been produced since 1965 in several variants. Four-wheel drive is the most interesting feature. Otherwise, it is extremely basic. All ages of loaves are seen on the battlefield. Ancient to brand new. You can imagine this vehicle, it's like a Scooby-Doo bus, only smaller and less powerful. And they make them brand new. Came out of the factory yesterday, looking like this. This is what they produce for the military. A 112 horsepower petrol engine means it's not fast. 112 horsepower and petrol. This is the slowest bus there is. I think it goes like 40 miles per hour maximum, maybe 50. Not more than that, especially if you have troops on board. The suspension is prehistoric. It has solid axles with leaf spring front and rear. Although it has a sway bar, this vehicle is unlikely to be good for high speeds. The loaf is easy prey for Ukrainian FPV drones. An FPV drone knocked this loaf onto its right side. The view of its underside shows the central engine along with the front and rear solid axles. There are no skid plates. More relevant, there is an unprotected fuel tank on each side. And look at that, there is. With kamikaze drones, sometimes you hit the back, the front, sometimes you hit the side, or if you drop a grenade, you might drop it to the side because it's very hard to aim at 300 meters height, 400 meters height. But if it has a fuel tank so exposed on the front, then any shrapnel, any smallest spark to that fuel tank, and no, it will not explode like in the movies. That doesn't really happen much, sometimes, but it will just burn slowly and burn the whole thing. Now, the explosion part is actually real, it's not a joke. Ukrainian army prefers diesel engines because diesel does not explode. That's how it does burn, but it doesn't explode. It just burns slowly and still burns the vehicle, but if there's no explosion, men usually live. If you use petrol, especially when it's like 30 degrees Celsius, 25, 30, 40 degrees, very hot in the Ukrainian summer, for example. The petrol vaporizes, some percentages of it vaporize in the petrol tank, but they do not escape. They're just there, vaporized, and pressurizes the tank. Any kind of shrapnel there, any kind of spark, and it depressurizes the tank in a fast way, releasing petrol fumes, which go kaboom very fast. So this is why officially Ukrainian forces, when they request something or when they buy something, they always want diesel. Russians don't care. This is a petrol engine with open fuel tanks, exposed fuel tanks. Oy, 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 ooh la la, very nice. I gotta throw in some Borat references here. The Russians use loaves to supply front lines and to escape from shelling. Hitting a fuel tank with an FPV drone will burn the loaf. More importantly, it will burn what the loaf is transporting, including personnel, equipment, ammunition and weapons. Why is Russia using antiquated vans in a war? Fortunately, Russian sources are exceptionally forthcoming when discussing loaves because these vehicles are bought using donations and delivered by volunteers. Why? Because they're so cheap. Volunteers love these vehicles. You can get a new one, brand new, shiny, green loaf, costing 15k. The cars we buy for the armed forces of Ukraine cost 15k, but they're usually Toyota Hiluxes, which are like 150,000 miles in. So they're really at the beginning of their life. Hilux rides for a long time. Russians state the delivery of ammunition and the removal of the wounded is simply impossible now without such vehicles. Large military vehicles are instantly attacked by FPV drones, which fly in swarms and fly 10 to 20 kilometers from the LBS to our rear. Life of a loaf is short. One group was happy that their loaf made 3 trips before being burned. Another says, a year ago we made a purchase of vehicle for fighters and now there is not a single one left. They do not last long in combat conditions. And these loaves, I mean, look, the clearance is good. Clearance is very good. This is why they picked this vehicle also, I think. But it looks funny. It just looks almost cute. You look at it, it's cute. Definitely not effective. The only plus about this, actually there's 2 pluses for Russians about this. They need an insane amount, since they don't care about the death or explosions of the petrol engines. They just need an insane amount of them. They're easy and fast to produce, cheap to produce, and they cost 15k a piece, new. So this is why this is the vehicle for the Russians. In this video, you can see in one field about 7 burned loaves. So they make whole infantry division assaults with these vehicles. They use them as armored personnel carriers, but I cannot say armored. They use them as non-armored personnel carriers. Oh, Russians. Russian soldiers are burning through these vehicles. The highest priority is the supply of the vehicles. Their shortage is now felt most acutely. But this demand is driving up prices. A new loaf is 1.5 million rubles, about 15k. And this is with the prices which have risen. Before, the loaf was about 10k. Russians say that they desperately need loaves to deliver supplies, transport personnel, because there are no other resources. Now, this is a very important sentence. Ever since Ukraine was allowed only a week ago to strike Russian logistics in the Belgorod region on Russian soil with Western weapons like HIMARS, They have been demolishing Russian logistical supply lines and supply hubs, which means truck transport for the Russians is now even more important. Before, it was, at least in the Belgorod region, they didn't even have to worry about it. They could just dump everything into supply hubs and then work it from there. But now these are destroyed, so you need to push the supply hubs more back into the Russian depth, and there's no rail coming to the front, so they gotta use these loaves now, transport all of the supplies. And Ukraine is hunting them with FPVs also. So these loaves are the Russian logistics. This is what you see here. It's not like, oh, military vehicle, military train, military transport. No, this is it. This is it. There's nothing else. It's a plus when there is, but usually by the tens of thousands, it's this machine. That is, they are not using armored vehicles because they do not have them. What happened to Russia's huge store of armored vehicles? The large-scale use of donated loaves strongly suggests Russian military is running low on armored vehicles. Russian Telegram channels support this claim. Ukraine is destroying Russia's logistics by burning their loaves. Also, many of you might say, oh, Russia has 20,000 BTRs in the storage. Just look at the satellite images. Yes, they do. Even now we can see satellite imagery with Russian parking lots, military parking lots filled with hundreds, if not thousands of tanks and BTRs. But these have been outside for the last 30 years. If it moves, if it's agile, if it works, it has already been sent to the front. Otherwise, it is rusting there. There is a reason why it hasn't moved from that parking lot, because it cannot. It's broken. It has been used for spare parts. So these thousands, or however you want to believe Russia has, they don't work. They're broken. Cannot do nothing about them. You don't fix something that has been outside in the rain and snow for 30 years. If it moves, it's on the front, therefore it's destroyed. If it hasn't moved from the lot, it doesn't move. A loaf is likely great on a farm or for camping, but its widespread use by Russian soldiers indicates a serious lack of military vehicles. We know the loaves are important to the Russians because they are now mounting, possibly incorrectly, electronic warfare systems on them. You can see a 1965 loaf with the most modern jammer. This is I don't know, call it a nipple. It looks like a nipple. It's a drone jammer, possibly one frequency only, not a very wide range of frequency. But still, that's their only protection against FPV drones. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. 50-50. Reading what the Russians say about these vehicles is very insightful. Have a look yourself. If you found this thread interesting, repost it. And Daniel R. from X did this thread. Thank you, Daniel. And this honestly looks cute. Look at it. Look at this baby. Can't. It's like a baby vehicle. This information, this thread, this usage of such loaf, such an old vehicle, tells us a lot about the state of the Russian armed forces. If they would have armored personnel carriers by the thousands like they did at the beginning of full-scale invasion, they would use them. That's the robust truth. If they don't use them, that's because they don't have them. But the vehicles don't end there, my friends. I'll introduce to you the 120mm motorbike. Look at this. This is a Russian frontline motorbike, logistical motorbike, because it's carrying 120s on the front. Now, you cannot really, these are really heavy. And there's a real issue on both sides, how to carry 155, 120, whatever, these big shells to the shooting positions, because the last 5 miles, there's almost no roads, or they're destroyed, or there's so many kamikaze drones that you don't want to risk your vehicles. Carrying these by hand is near impossible for the length period of time. So the Russians are using their motorcycles, and it works. If it works, you gotta do it. Artillery is everything in this war, so they're doing it like that. Now, my friends, here we see what the Russians are really resorted to using in the past year in this war in offensive operations. Here you can see a typical Russian offensive battalion. Let's call it like that. What do we see? Motorbikes, buggies, and this is probably logistics here. That's it. That's it. There's no armored personnel carriers because they cannot produce them fast enough, and the old ones have all been refurbished, sent to the front, and destroyed. I remember 2023, February, Vuhledar, massive armored convoy attack. In 3 days, I think, over 100 vehicles, all armored, no motorbikes. At that time, they had a massive amount of armored vehicles, all sent to Vuhledar. Boom after boom, kaboom, bada bim. It was fireworks. 3 days later, 100 vehicles had been knocked out cold. And this is why they're lacking. If they can lose 100 armored personnel carriers and tanks destroyed in 3 days, multiply all of the battles and all of the kamikaze drone footage you see, and this is what they resort to now. Motorbikes, cheap. Buggies, cheap. But they are so easy to destroy. With drones, with artillery, with small arms fire. Hey, the Bushmaster 25mm from Bradley, that eats it right up. And here's another look. There's of course ATV, I don't know how you call them in English, ATV, vehicles here also. They just resorted to using very fast, light and agile vehicles on the front, which have no protection whatsoever, because this all is not designed to keep your men alive, it's just designed to waste Ukrainian bullets. Now, my friends, I'll read you a thread about a battle happening in Chasiv Yar. Chasiv Yar is west from Bakhmut, and ever since Russians occupied Bakhmut, they have been trying to push on Chasiv Yar, and it has become another Bakhmut. Another meat grinder, very slow advances, mostly insane Russian casualties. Now, there was a huge battle yesterday. I'll read you the reports of it. Russians tried to cross the canal. There's a water canal right before Chasiv Yar. It was the same deal in Bakhmut, actually. They tried to cross it with a huge offensive operation. And we now know how it went for them. By far the biggest news is the Russian offensive south of Chasiv Yar that was designed to push west, then up and behind the Ukrainian forces in the Canal district. They used the forest to build up 2 assault groups, one to strike north and one to strike west. This is the section of the canal that goes under the hill in a tunnel with a forest above it, and the only place the Russians can cross it with vehicles of any weight. This move would let them advance into the western forest and then north to the more weakly defended residential areas. If they capture the Novi residential district, they would cut the Ukrainian supplies into the Canal district and force them out. The Russian idea on paper sounds fine, but the reality of it is more complex. Well, for one, it's almost completely road and track free, so the idea of vehicles in support quickly becomes mute. The area can only really be traversed by infantry, and even then only slowly. Add that to the crossing between the forest. Isn't forested itself leaving a wide open area, so to traverse on the foot in full view? So the Russian troops on their way to begin their attacks were constantly under attack from drones and artillery. The Russians also didn't seem to realize that they couldn't use airstrikes because they had no way of distinguishing their forces or their location in the density of the forest. Despite it all, the Russians carried out the attack, getting to the outskirts of the Novi district. Whoa, they actually made it. The Ukrainians used reconnaissance drones to map out the path of the Russians were taking, and quietly kept their own forces in the forest, slowly preparing to act as they got into position. Once ready and guided by drones, the Ukrainians pounced on the Russian infantry groups one at a time, eliminating them in surprise attacks. The Russians lost hundreds of men in the attacks, and even Russian sources say they gave up trying, having failed moving west, and bizarrely, not having launched both attempts simultaneously. The other Russian group attacked northward. Again, they had to cross open terrain and quickly lost most of their manpower and equipment. A T-90M assault tank, 3 BMDs, and an armored car were lost in short order. The whole operation was carried out by supposedly elite airborne forces. The Russians lost almost everything they sent in. Having failed, they returned to their expensive attacks on the front and direct assaults, which drained their manpower in one-sided attrition. Poor planning and lack of coordination, preparation and failure to understand the terrain they were operating still shows how incompetent many Russian commanders are. If it's not outright incompetence, it's utter disregard for the cost of making these decisions in terms of manpower, which they have low regard for anyway. Yet, when they are now clearly running low on tanks and armored vehicles, they waste them in piecemeal operations. That suggests the truth about supply of these vehicles isn't being communicated down to the line from above. Presumably because nobody wants that known. Satellites tell us that the days of the vast Soviet reserves are over. They have used them up. It seems increasingly clear that Russia must rely on its only real advantage: endless manpower. Ukrainian patience and planning, preparation and thoroughness again provided a victory over potentially overwhelming manpower. Expert use of drones and tactical surprise wrecked this Russian operation. I wanted to read you this whole thread. It took some time, but this is not an isolated event. This repeats itself battle after battle. Russians make these decisions, Russian commanders make them without any planning, without any regard to the safety of the men, or without any regard if it's actually doable. Just go. Ukrainians, on the other hand, plan thoroughly, calculate, prepare, and then strike at the right time, right location, and we can see who is winning these battles. Now, my friends, I just want to share with you a little bit of a funny story. This is Russian Belgorod Oblast, and this is actually a Russian police car chasing. What do you think it's chasing? Well, I'll fast forward, and it's a tank. I'm not kidding you. It's a military tank. You know why? Because the commander got pissed drunk, hopped inside his tank, started driving around with it, very drunk, and it drove over a car, civilian car, killing the driver. Now he's driving away, trying to get away from the police in a tank. It's full GTA in Belgorod Oblast right now. It pulled over, and the commander is probably sleeping inside now. This is what's going on. It's full lawlessness. To me, it reminds a little bit of the time before the collapse of the Russian army in the First World War. It began a few months before the actual collapse with the collapse of the discipline. That's how it began. These videos remind me of that. Not that I lived at that time, but they remind me of the history videos that I watch about that. It is leading up to something big. Collapse of the discipline is always the first sign of the dissolution of the army. Now, my friends, I'll butcher some buy me a coffee names. It's hump day. I gotta do it. I can't help myself. What's that? You don't want it? Well, I gotta do it. Sorry, my friends. Matti Malsup, Diego Likhi, Jochen Fulton, Elliot Rosewater, Josef Pukek, Hesam Lamey, Tarki Pierke, Perikomo Terenke. Ooh, freaky names today. If you like me butchering your names, if you enjoy that Estonian accent, killing your name into oblivion, then become a monthly member of Buy Me a Coffee. Link is in the description below. Until my next video, my friends, Slava Ukraini, and bye-bye.